The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the packed courtroom as Detective Michael Rodriguez sat motionless, his face a mask of disbelief. After 15 years of decorated service with the Lakeside Police Department, he now faced the ultimate punishment for a crime he swears he didn't commit. The evidence seemed overwhelming. His service weapon as the murder weapon, security footage placing him at the scene, and testimony from a witness who claimed to see him fleeing. In just 30 days, he's scheduled to receive a lethal injection. But while the justice system, his colleagues, and even his friends have abandoned him, one loyal companion refuses to accept his fate. His German Shepherd, Rex, trained in evidence detection, begins exhibiting strange behavior that suggests he senses something everyone else has missed. When Rex discovers the first piece of evidence that could unravel the entire case, it sets in motion a desperate race against time. Will this extraordinary dog's discoveries come in time to save his master's life? And what powerful forces will stop at nothing to ensure Mike never walks free? Before we dive into this incredible true story, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from today. And if you're fascinated by stories of loyalty and justice against all odds, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Rain pelted the windows of the Lakeside County Courthouse as Judge Martha Sullivan's voice cut through the tense silence. In the case of the state versus Michael Rodriguez, on the charge of first-degree murder of City Councilman Edward Palmer, we the jury find the defendant guilty. The words hung in the air like a physical force. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. At the prosecution table, District Attorney Howard Fletcher nodded slightly, his face a study in professional satisfaction. In the gallery, officers from the Lakeside PD sat in uniform, their expressions a mix of disgust and vindication. The jury recommends death by lethal injection, continued the jury foreman, his voice slightly unsteady. Judge Sullivan adjusted her glasses, looking directly at Mike. Detective Rodriguez, you have been found guilty of murdering an elected official of this city in cold blood. Given the heinous nature of this crime and the violation of public trust, from a sworn officer of the law, I see no reason to deviate from the jury's recommendation. You are hereby sentenced to death to be carried out 30 days from today. The sharp crack of the gavel sealed his fate. Mike Rodriguez, who had brought dozens of killers to justice during his career, now stood condemned as one himself. He remained perfectly still, only the slight tremor in his handcuffed hands betraying any emotion as the bailiffs approached to lead him away. Mike Rodriguez had spent his entire adult life in service to Lakeside City. The son of Dominican immigrants, he'd worked his way through the police academy at the top of his class, rising quickly through the ranks to become the youngest detective in the department's history. His record spoke for itself. Over 200 successful homicide investigations, 3 commendations for bravery, and a reputation for integrity that had made him both respected and envied. As the bailiffs led him toward the door, Mike's eyes searched the courtroom one last time. They landed on Detective Andrea Thompson, his partner of 6 years. Andy sat rigid in her seat, her face carefully blank as she avoided his gaze. They had been more than partners, friends who had trusted each other with their lives. Now, she wouldn't even look at him. Her testimony had been particularly damaging, describing Mike's apparent obsession with Councilman Palmer's activities in the weeks before the murder. James Wilson, Mike's attorney, gathered his papers dejectedly. He had fought hard, but the evidence had been overwhelming. The ballistics matching Mike's service weapon, the security footage showing someone of Mike's build entering Palmer's apartment, building, the witness who placed him at the scene. It all formed a perfect chain of circumstantial evidence that the jury couldn't ignore. As Mike passed the prosecution table, he locked eyes with Captain William Harrington, his commanding officer, Unlike the others, Harrington met his gaze directly, his expression unreadable, save for the slight upward curve at the corner of his mouth. Something in that almost smile sent a chill down Mike's spine that had nothing to do with his sentence. The evidence against Mike seemed airtight, presented methodically by DA Fletcher over 2 weeks of testimony. First came the motive. Councilman Palmer had been heading a special commission investigating police corruption, and records showed Mike had been called to testify before that commission the day after the murder. Then came the physical evidence. The bullet that killed Palmer matched Mike's service weapon, which was found in a dumpster 3 blocks from the crime scene with only Mike's fingerprints on it. The security footage, though grainy, showed someone of Mike's height and build entering Palmer's upscale apartment building at Pinewood Apartments at 11:42 p.m., wearing a dark jacket similar to one Mike owned. A witness, Palmer's neighbor, testified to seeing a man matching Mike's description hurrying from the building shortly after midnight when gunshots were reported. Most damning was the testimony from the department's Internal Affairs Division, that Mike had requested information about Palmer's movements multiple times in the weeks before the murder. Andy's testimony confirmed this apparent obsession, though she had appeared reluctant to speak against her partner. The timeline seemed conclusive as well. Mike had no alibi for the night of the murder. He claimed to have been home alone, walking Rex, and then falling asleep watching television. A story impossible to verify. His cell phone had pinged towers near Palmer's apartment around the time of the murder, contradicting his alibi. The prosecution painted a picture of a detective who feared exposure in Palmer's corruption investigation. Mike's defense, that he was actually feeding information to Palmer about corrupt officers and was being framed, fell flat without evidence to support it. As Judge Sullivan had noted in her sentencing remarks, the case against Detective Rodriguez represented a tragic fall from grace, but an open and shut case of murder. As the prison transport van pulled away from the courthouse, a sharp bark cut through the rainy afternoon. Rex, Mike's 4-year-old German shepherd, strained against his leash in the parking lot, eyes fixed on the departing vehicle. Dr. Kevin Barnes, the veterinarian who had agreed to take temporary custody of the dog, struggled to hold the powerful animal back. "Easy, boy," Kevin murmured. But Rex continued to bark urgently, his body tense and alert in a way the vet had never seen before. Rex wasn't just a pet. He was Mike's K-9 partner, specially trained in narcotics detection and evidence recovery. The bond between man and dog went beyond companionship. They had worked dozens of cases together, communicating almost telepathically in the field. Rex had been the one constant in Mike's life since his divorce 3 years earlier. A roommate and partner who asked nothing but gave everything. Kevin had known Mike for years, treating Rex since he was a puppy. While he hadn't attended the trial, unwilling to see his friend in such circumstances, he had agreed without hesitation to take Rex until more permanent arrangements could be made. But looking at the dog now, straining toward the vanishing transport van with such desperate intensity, Kevin felt a flicker of doubt about the verdict for the first time. "Come on, boy," he said gently, tugging Rex toward his car. "There's nothing you can do now." But the look in Rex's eyes seemed to say otherwise. 2 weeks passed at Eastridge State Penitentiary. Mike adjusted to the grim routine of death row, the isolation, the constant surveillance, the indignity of chains for his rare moments outside his cell. His appeals process had begun, but James Wilson had been brutally honest about their chances. The evidence was too strong, the conviction too solid. Without new evidence, Mike Rodriguez would die in exactly 16 days. Across town, Rex's behavior had become increasingly concerning. He refused to eat regularly, lost interest in walks, and spent hours staring at the door, as if expecting Mike to walk through it at any moment. Kevin had seen grieving animals before, but this was different. Rex wasn't just missing Mike. He seemed agitated, restless, as if something urgent needed to be communicated. "He's not sleeping," Kevin explained to Andy when she finally came to check on the dog. "He paces all night, whines at the windows. I've checked him thoroughly. There's nothing physically wrong." Andy knelt beside Rex, guilt washing over her face as she stroked his fur. She hadn't visited Mike yet, couldn't face him after her testimony had helped convict him. "I should have fought harder," she said quietly, more to herself than to Kevin. Something about the case felt wrong from the beginning, but the evidence... "You still have doubts?" Kevin asked, watching her closely. Andy's professional mask slipped for just a moment. "I worked with Mike for 6 years. He's not a killer." She stood abruptly, composing herself. "But I saw the evidence. We all did." As she turned to leave, Rex suddenly sprang to attention, grabbing the sleeve of her jacket with gentle but insistent teeth. He tugged her toward the door, whining urgently. "What's gotten into him?" Andy asked, startled. Kevin shook his head. "He's been doing this more and more. It's like he's trying to tell us something." "About Mike?" Andy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rex barked once, sharply. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His intelligent eyes fixed on hers. 3 days later, Kevin took Rex for a checkup at his clinic. On their way home, a traffic detour forced them to drive past the Harbor Point Marina, an area where Mike and Rex had worked several cases involving drug shipments coming through the port. As they approached, Rex became increasingly agitated, barking and scratching at the window. Against his better judgment, Kevin pulled over. 10 minutes, he told Rex, clipping on his leash. "Then we're going home." The moment they entered the marina, Rex transformed. His training kicked in, nose to the ground, body tense, pulling. Kevin with single-minded determination toward a row of weathered warehouses. The area seemed deserted, many buildings marked for demolition as part of the city's waterfront revitalization project. Rex led Kevin to Warehouse 7, its windows boarded up, heavy chains securing the doors. The dog circled the building, stopping at a rusted drainage pipe that extended from beneath the foundation. He began to dig frantically at the saturated ground, around it barking between efforts. "Rex, stop! What are you doing?" Kevin tried to pull him back, but the determined dog continued until his paws uncovered something lodged in the pipe, a small waterproof case, the kind used to protect electronics. Kevin stared at it, heart racing. With trembling fingers, he opened the case to find a damaged cell phone, its screen cracked, but potentially still functional. On the back, barely visible through layers of mud, was a small sticker, the logo of the City Council offices. Kevin sat in his living room that evening, staring at the phone. After hours of hesitation, he finally made the call. "We need to talk," he told Andy when she answered. "It's about Rex. He found something." 30 minutes later, Andy arrived, accompanied by Detective Carlos Ramirez, one of the few officers who had openly maintained doubts about Mike's guilt. Carlos had been on vacation during the murder and subsequent investigation, returning only for the final days of the trial. His presence surprised Kevin. "I trust Carlos," Andy explained, seeing Kevin's hesitation, "and we need someone with access to police resources." Kevin placed the muddy phone on the coffee table. "Rex dug this up at Harbor Point Marina. It has a city council sticker." Carlos pulled on latex gloves before examining it. "Palmer's?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. But Rex found it buried by a warehouse scheduled for demolition. That can't be coincidence." Andy paced the room, her professional skepticism battling with hope. "Even if it is Palmer's, it doesn't prove Mike's innocence. It could have been planted there before or after the murder. But it might contain information," Carlos countered. "Messages, photos, call logs." "The phone's damaged," Kevin said. "I didn't want to try charging it until I talked to you." Rex watched them from his bed, alert and focused, as if he understood every word. "I know someone who can help." Carlos said finally. Rebecca Chen from the Lakeside Tribune. She has contacts in digital forensics who operate outside official channels. Andy hesitated. If we're wrong, we could be interfering with a closed murder case. Our careers... Mike has 13 days left, Kevin interrupted. What's worth more, your career or his life? Andy looked at Rex, who had moved to her side, his intelligent eyes seemingly pleading with her. She reached down to stroke his head, making her decision. Call your journalist friend, but this stays between us until we know what we're dealing with. Rebecca Chen's contact turned out to be a former FBI digital forensics expert named Simon Keller, who now ran a private cybersecurity firm. In his small lab, filled with specialized equipment, he carefully disassembled the damaged phone. It's definitely Palmer's backup phone, he confirmed, after extracting the SIM card. I can see his council email account configured here. They watched tensely as Simon connected the phone's components directly to his equipment, bypassing the damaged screen and battery. There's something interesting, he murmured after several minutes of work. The last app used before the phone went dead was the voice recorder. With a few keystrokes, he pulled up a list of audio files. Most are labeled as council meeting or notes, but this last one, he pointed to a file named only with a date, the day of Palmer's murder. The room fell silent as Simon played the recording. At first, there was only background noise, traffic, footsteps, then voices became clear. The shipment arrives Thursday. We need to make sure the evidence from the Ortega bus disappears before then. The voice was unfamiliar to Kevin, but caused Andy and Carlos to exchange shocked glances. That's Lieutenant Grant, Carlos whispered. Palmer's voice came next. I have everything I need to take this to the FBI. Your operation is finished. Stephen. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Councilman. Grant's voice turned threatening. This goes higher than you can imagine. Captain Harrington. Palmer sounded unsurprised. I know he's running everything. I have the offshore account. Numbers, the shipment schedules, the officers on your payroll. A third voice joined the conversation, sending chills down Andy's spine. Then I'm afraid this conversation is over, Edward. Captain Harrington, she breathed, recognizing her. Commanding officer's distinctive tone. The recording captured footsteps, a door closing, then Palmer's voice again, now alone. Meeting with Grant and Harrington concluded at 9:17 p.m. They've threatened me directly. If anything happens to me, Detective Rodriguez has copies of everything. The recording cut off abruptly. For several seconds, no one spoke. The implications were staggering. Palmer had been investigating Harrington and Grant for corruption. He had mentioned Mike as his confidant, and most importantly, the recording placed both Harrington and Grant with Palmer the night of his murder, hours before his body was discovered. This is it, Carlos said quietly. This is the motive. Palmer was going to expose them, and Mike was helping him. It's not enough, Andy countered, though her voice lacked conviction. It doesn't prove Mike didn't pull the trigger later, that night. But it gives us somewhere to start, Rebecca said, speaking for the first time, and a reason why Rodriguez might have been framed. Rex, who had been lying quietly by Kevin's feet, suddenly raised his head, ears alert. He gave a soft whine, as if confirming their theory. Kevin scratched behind the dog's ears. Good boy, Rex, but we need more. We need to find what Mike hid for Palmer. With 11 days remaining before Mike's execution, the team worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Rebecca used her journalistic contacts to investigate Harrington's background, discovering a troubling pattern of officers under his command becoming suddenly wealthy before transferring or retiring. Carlos quietly pulled files on the Ortega. Drugbast mentioned in the recording, finding significant discrepancies between the evidence logged and what was actually presented in court. Andy took the biggest risk visiting Mike in prison for the first time since his conviction. The meeting was brief and tense, observed by guards and likely recorded. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice tight with emotion. "I should have believed you." Mike studied her face, thinner now and marked by sleepless nights. "Rex found something, didn't he?" Andy's eyes widened slightly. "How did you know?" A ghost of a smile touched Mike's lips. "He's a good dog. The best partner I ever had." The implied comparison wasn't lost on Andy, who flinched. "Palmer gave me documentation," Mike continued quietly. "Evidence about Harrington's operation. I hid it somewhere only Rex could find." "Where?" Andy pressed, conscious of the guards' attention. Mike's eyes flicked toward the surveillance camera. "Remember where we found those kids last summer, during the flood? Rex knows." Their time ended before Andy could ask for clarification, but as she left the prison, the memory clicked into place. Last summer, during catastrophic flooding, she and Mike had located 2 missing children in an abandoned drainage tunnel near Westside Storage Facility. It had been Rex who found them, tracking their scent through rushing water. Back at Kevin's house, the team pored over maps of the drainage system. "It makes sense," Carlos said. "These tunnels connect to the harbor. If Harrington's operation involved drug smuggling through the port, these would provide perfect covert access routes." "But there are miles of tunnels," Rebecca objected. "How will we find the exact location?" Kevin looked at Rex, who sat alertly, watching them. "We don't need to. Rex will lead us there." The next morning, equipped with flashlights, waterproof bags, and recording devices, they brought Rex to the entrance of the drainage tunnel. The recent spring rains had left the tunnels, partially flooded, making their search more difficult and more dangerous. "Find it, Rex," Kevin commanded, releasing the dog from his leash. Rex needed no further encouragement. He plunged into the tunnel with purpose, leading them through a labyrinth of concrete channels. After nearly an hour of sloshing through knee-deep water, Rex stopped at what appeared to be a maintenance access point, a small alcove with a rusted ladder leading to a sealed manhole cover. The dog began scratching at one of the concrete walls, where a section appeared to have been recently repaired. Carlos stepped forward with a small hammer, carefully chipping away at the fresh concrete until he revealed a waterproof tube hidden in a hollow behind it. Inside were USB drives, financial documents, and photographs, Palmer's insurance policy against Harrington and his operation. The evidence was comprehensive. Offshore account transactions linking Harrington to major drug suppliers, altered evidence logs showing drugs and money vanishing from police lockup, and surveillance photos of Harrington and Grant meeting with known cartel members. Most damning of all was a video file on one of the USB drives, footage from Palmer's home security system showing Harrington and Grant entering his apartment at 11:42 p.m., the exact time the prosecution claimed Mike had arrived. The timestamp matched the grainy building security footage used to convict Mike, but the faces were clear. That's why they needed Mike to take the fall, Andy realized. They used his service weapon to kill Palmer, then planted all the evidence to point to him. They needed a convincing scapegoat, and what better than a detective who could be connected to Palmer's investigation? "We need to get this to a judge immediately," Carlos said, carefully bagging the evidence. As they turned to leave, splashing echoed through the tunnel behind them. Rex growled, the hair on his back standing up. "Someone's coming," Rebecca whispered. They barely made it back to Kevin's house before realizing they were being followed. An unmarked police cruiser parked across the street, making no attempt to hide its surveillance. Inside the house, they spread the evidence across the kitchen table, formulating a plan. "We can't trust anyone in the department," Andy said, closing the curtains against watchful eyes. "Harrington has too much influence." "We need to go directly to the state attorney general," Carlos suggested. "Bypass the local system entirely." But how do we get there without being stopped? Kevin asked. They're watching the house, probably our phones too. Rebecca nodded grimly. My editor received a call this morning warning the paper against running any stories questioning Rodriguez's conviction. They're already moving to contain this. That evening, Lieutenant Grant arrived at Kevin's door with 2 uniformed officers, a search warrant in hand. Anonymous tip about stolen evidence, he explained with a cold smile. Need to check the premises. While the officers ransacked the house, Grant made his real purpose clear. Whatever you think you found, it won't help Rodriguez, he told them quietly. Evidence has a way of disappearing in this town. People too, sometimes. The threat hung in the air long after the officers left, taking their laptops and phones, but finding nothing incriminating. The team had already hidden Palmer's evidence in Rebecca's car parked blocks away. That night, they relocated to Carlos's mountain cabin, a remote property with no digital footprint. With 9 days left before Mike's execution, they began making copies of all the evidence, preparing packages for multiple government agencies, journalists, and public defenders. We need a foolproof way to deliver this, Andy said, sealing another envelope. If we're caught, the evidence might never reach the right hands. A noise outside silenced their discussion. Headlights swept across the windows as vehicles approached on the secluded road. They found us, Carlos whispered, drawing his service weapon. Rebecca quickly gathered the evidence copies into a backpack. There must be a back way out. Kevin turned to Rex, who was already alert, sensing the danger. We need a distraction. The cabin erupted into chaos as flashbang grenades shattered the windows. Armed men in tactical gear, not regular police, stormed through every entrance. Carlos managed to fire 2 shots before being tackled to the ground. Rebecca was pinned against the wall, the backpack torn from her grasp. Andy and Kevin were forced to their knees, hands behind their heads. Lieutenant Grant entered last, surveying the scene with satisfaction. I told you, evidence has a way of disappearing, he said, picking up one of the evidence packages. Captain Harrington sends his regards. He's particularly interested in Palmer's recordings. You won't get away with this, Andy spat. People know what we found. Grant laughed. Who? The disgraced detective on death row. The journalist whose credibility we've already undermined. By morning, you'll all be facing charges for obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. No one will believe a word you say. He turned to his men. Secure them in the vehicles, make sure they're separated, and find that damn dog. In the confusion of the raid, Rex had disappeared. Grant dispatched 2 men to search the surroundings, but the German shepherd was nowhere to be found. As they were being led to separate vehicles, a sudden snarling blur shot from the darkness. Rex launched himself at the man holding Rebecca, his powerful jaws clamping around the arm, gripping her. The man screamed, releasing both Rebecca and the backpack, which skidded across the ground. Shoot that dog, Grant shouted, drawing his weapon. In the split second of distraction, Andy drove her elbow into her captor's stomach, breaking free. Carlos, though handcuffed, managed to knock another attacker off balance. Kevin scrambled for the backpack, snatching it up before diving behind a vehicle for cover. Rex continued his assault, moving with military precision, disabling one attacker after another without deadly force, exactly as he'd been trained. When Grant fired at the dog, Rex seemed to anticipate the shot, darting away and then doubling back to knock the lieutenant off his feet, sending his gun flying. The tunnel under the shed, Carlos shouted to the others. It leads to the valley. Ooh. One by one, they made their escape through the hidden exit Carlos had installed years ago as a fire precaution. A narrow tunnel beneath the woodshed that emerged in a gully several hundred yards away. Rex was the last to join them, appearing at the tunnel exit minutes later with a torn piece of Grant's uniform in his teeth and a USB drive from Palmer's evidence that had fallen during the struggle. Good boy, Kevin whispered, embracing the dog as they crouched in the darkness. The best boy. With their phones confiscated and vehicles blocked, they faced a desperate 12-mile hike through wilderness to reach the nearest town. And with Harrington's men surely already in pursuit, they had minutes at most before the hunt began. Rex led the way, his superior senses guiding them through the moonless night. With just 6 days remaining until Mike's execution, the team's situation seemed dire. Though they had escaped the cabin, Harrington had used his influence to issue warrants for their arrests on charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. Their names and faces were broadcast across local media, described as conspirators trying to free a convicted killer. Hiding in a cheap motel room paid for with Rebecca's emergency cash, they assessed their remaining evidence. Most of their copies had been left behind in the chaos, and what they had saved wasn't enough to conclusively prove Mike's innocence. "We need the original security footage from Palmer's building," Andy said, desperation creeping into her voice. "The unaltered version has to exist somewhere." "The footage would have gone through department servers," Carlos explained. "If Harrington replaced it with the doctored version showing Mike, the original might still be in the system backups." "We can't exactly walk into the police station," Kevin pointed out. Rex, who had been resting near the door, suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward. He rose and began pawing at the TV remote on the bedside table, accidentally turning on the local news. The screen showed Captain Harrington giving a press conference about the conspiracy to undermine justice in the Palmer murder case. "Pleased to announce that we've recovered all the stolen and falsified evidence," Harrington was saying. "As a result, Rodriguez's execution will proceed as scheduled. I personally reviewed the case files and can assure the public that justice will be served." "Turn it off," Rebecca said disgustedly, but Rex barked sharply, his attention fixed on the screen. Now, the camera showed Harrington walking away from the podium toward his department SUV. As he reached for the door handle, the camera briefly captured a close-up of his wrist and the distinctive watch he wore. "Wait!" Andy gasped, lunging for the remote to pause the broadcast. "That watch! I've seen it before." Carlos squinted at the screen. "It's just a Rolex. Expensive, but not unusual." "No, look closer." Andy pointed to a distinctive scratch across the face of the watch. "I've seen this exact watch in the building security footage they used to convict Mike. The person entering Palmer's building was wearing it." Rebecca pulled out her laptop, opening a copy of the trial evidence. They crowded around as she pulled up the grainy security footage. Despite the poor quality, when she froze the frame and zoomed in, the same watch was clearly visible on the wrist of the figure the prosecution had claimed was Mike. Harrington was wearing his own watch when he went to kill Palmer, Andy realized. They doctored the footage to make the figure look like Mike, but they missed this detail. "We still need the original unaltered footage to prove it," Carlos said. Rex barked again, drawing their attention back to the TV where the news had continued playing. The story had changed to coverage of Lakeside's upcoming waterfront redevelopment project. The camera showed construction equipment already at work at Harbor Point Marina, including Warehouse 7, where Rex had found Palmer's phone. "They're destroying evidence," Kevin realized. "The warehouses connect to those drainage tunnels. That's how they've been moving drugs through the city." Rex's behavior grew increasingly agitated. He circled the room, then stopped at Rebecca's laptop, pawing at the screen where it showed the security footage. "He's trying to tell us something," Kevin said, watching the dog closely. Rebecca cycled through the evidence files until Rex barked at a document, a shipping manifest found among Palmer's evidence, listing Harbor Point Management Company as the owner of several warehouses. "Look at the corporate registration," Andy said, scanning the document. "The company is owned by a holding firm based in the Cayman Islands." Carlos pulled up another file, Harrington's financial records that Palmer had uncovered. The same offshore account that's been paying Harrington. Harrington owns the warehouses, Rebecca concluded. He's rushing the demolition to destroy any remaining evidence. Rex barked again, more urgently this time, racing to the door and scratching at it. I think Rex knows where to find what we need, Kevin said. The original security footage might be hidden at the warehouse. With time running out, they hatched a desperate plan. While Harrington and his men were focused on finding them, they would make one final attempt to retrieve the evidence that would save Mike's life. The courthouse was packed to capacity, news cameras lined the back wall, and every seat was filled. As Judge Sullivan entered the emergency hearing, Mike sat at the defense table beside James Wilson, confusion evident on his face. The last-minute stay of execution had come without explanation. Only an urgent court order issued directly from the State Attorney General's office. Captain Harrington sat confidently in the front row, Lieutenant Grant beside him. They exchanged smug glances as Judge Sullivan called the court to order. "This is highly irregular," she began, looking irritated. "I've been provided no explanation for why we're reconsidering a closed case days before a scheduled execution." Before Wilson could respond, the courtroom doors opened. Heads turned as Andy and Carlos walked in, followed by Rebecca, Kevin, and to audible gasps, Rex. The German shepherd walked proudly beside Kevin, drawing shocked murmurs from the gallery. Harrington half rose from his seat, his face darkening. "Your Honor, these individuals are wanted for evidence tampering. They should be arrested immediately." Judge Sullivan frowned. "Detective Thompson, explain your presence and why there is a dog in my courtroom." Andy stepped forward. "Your Honor, we have uncovered conclusive evidence that Detective Rodriguez was framed for Councilman Palmer's murder. The real killers are in this courtroom, Captain William Harrington and Lieutenant Stephen Grant." The courtroom erupted into chaos, silenced only by the sharp crack of Sullivan's gavel. "That is an extraordinary accusation, Detective. I assume you have extraordinary evidence to support it." "We do, Your Honor." Andy nodded to Carlos, who approached the bench with a tablet and a sealed evidence bag. "With the assistance of the State Attorney General's Cybercrimes Unit, we recovered the original, unaltered security footage from Councilman Palmer's building." The judge instructed the bailiff to set up the courtroom's display system. As the ET video began to play, the difference from the trial footage was immediately clear. The timestamp was identical, but the figure entering Palmer's building was unmistakably not Mike Rodriguez. It was Captain William Harrington, his face clearly visible as he looked up briefly toward the camera. "We also recovered this from a hidden safe in Warehouse 7 at Harbor Point Marina," Andy continued as Carlos presented the evidence bag. "Captain Harrington's backup hard drive containing the altered footage they submitted to the court, along with complete records of his drug smuggling operation through the harbor." Harrington lunged to his feet. "This is fabricated evidence. They broke into private property. Property registered to your shell company," Rebecca interrupted, approaching with additional documents. "The same company that received millions from the Salazar cartel over the past 5 years." Grant made a sudden move toward the exit, only to find his path blocked by state troopers who had quietly entered the courtroom. More officers appeared at all entrances. Judge Sullivan studied the new evidence, her expression gradually shifting from skepticism to shock. "Mr. Wilson, how do you move forward based on this information?" Mike's attorney rose. "Your Honor, we move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Detective Rodriguez and request the arrest of Captain Harrington and Lieutenant Grant for the murder of Councilman Palmer, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to frame an innocent man." The judge turned to the State Attorney General's representative, who nodded confirmation. "Based on the evidence independently verified by my office, the state supports this motion." Judge Sullivan removed her glasses, fixing Harrington with a cold stare. Captain Harrington, Lieutenant Grant, you are remanded into custody pending charges. She turned to Mike. Detective Rodriguez, in light of this overwhelming evidence of your innocence, all charges against you are dismissed. You are free to go, with the court's apologies for this miscarriage of justice. The bailiffs moved forward to take Harrington and Grant into custody. As he was being handcuffed, Harrington lunged unexpectedly toward Mike, hatred contorting his features. You should be dead, Rodriguez. You should have died with Palmer. Before anyone could react, Rex sprang forward, positioning himself protectively between Mike and Harrington. The dog didn't attack, but his warning growl made the captain freeze in his tracks. Even your dog knows you're guilty, Mike said quietly as the officers pulled Harrington away. Outside the courthouse, news cameras captured the moment Mike walked into the sunshine as a free man for the first time in months. Rex broke away from Kevin, racing toward his master with a joy that brought tears to the eyes of onlookers. Mike knelt on the courthouse steps, arms outstretched, as Rex leapt into his embrace, whining and licking his face in unbridled happiness. How did you keep believing you'd be exonerated? A reporter called out. Mike looked up, one arm still, around Rex, his other hand gesturing toward his friends who had risked everything to save him. I knew the truth would come out eventually. I just didn't know it would be my dog who would find it. He stood, scratching Rex behind the ears. Sometimes the most loyal hearts see what justice misses, and Rex here has the most loyal heart of all. In the days that followed, the full story emerged. Harrington's drug smuggling operation collapsed as arrests spread throughout the department. Mike was officially reinstated with full back pay and a formal apology from the city. 6 months later, Mike Rodriguez stood at the edge of Lakeside Arbor, watching the sunset paint the water in brilliant oranges and golds. The city had changed since his release. A new mayor, a reformed police department, and most importantly, a sense of justice restored. Today marked the final verdict in the ongoing corruption trials. William Harrington and Stephen Grant had both received multiple life sentences for Palmer's murder, drug trafficking, and conspiracy. Their network had been dismantled, with over 30 officers and officials indicted across 3 counties. Mike still found it difficult to process how close he had come to dying for a crime he didn't commit. He felt Rex press against his leg, the German shepherd's warm presence, a constant reminder of the loyalty that had saved his life. "Ready to head home, buddy?" Mike asked, scratching behind the dog's ears. Rex barked once, tail wagging enthusiastically. The path to rebuilding his life hadn't been easy. Despite his exoneration, many in Lakeside still viewed him with suspicion, the lingering effect of having been branded a killer. Others treated him like a celebrity, fascinated by his near death. Experience and miraculous salvation, neither reaction sat comfortably with him. All Mike wanted was to return to some version of normalcy, to do the job he had always been meant to do, bringing actual criminals to justice. The Lakeside Police Department had offered him his detective badge back with a promotion and his choice of assignments. He had surprised everyone, including himself, by turning it down. The system he had devoted his life to had failed him completely. Without Rex and his small group of believers, he would have been executed for a crime engineered by the very people sworn to uphold the law. That wasn't something he could simply move past. Instead, Mike had accepted a position with the state, Attorney General's newly formed Public Integrity Unit, investigating corruption in law enforcement agencies across the state. The irony wasn't lost on him. His near execution had ultimately placed him in a position to prevent similar injustices from happening to others. His phone buzzed with a text from Andy. "Dinner at 7? Kevin and Rebecca are coming too. Big news to share." Mike smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. His relationship with Andy had been complicated to rebuild. Her testimony had helped convict him, a fact neither could forget, but she had also risked everything to save him when the truth emerged. Over months of careful conversations and shared work dismantling Harrington's network, they had found their way back to a friendship that, while changed, was perhaps stronger for having been tested so severely. The walk back to his new apartment took Mike through downtown Lakeside, past the courthouse where he had nearly been condemned to death. He no longer felt the chill that had once accompanied passing the building. Instead, he felt a strange sense of purpose. His experience had opened his eyes to flaws in the justice system that he had previously been blind to. Comfortable in his privilege as a respected detective, Rex trotted beside him, occasionally scanning their surroundings with the alertness that made him such an exceptional working dog. The German Shepherd had become something of a local celebrity since the case. The department had officially retired him from service, awarding him a Medal of Honor in a ceremony that had made national news. There had even been talk of a movie deal, though Mike had firmly declined those offers. Some experiences were too personal to become entertainment. When they reached the apartment, Mike found an unmarked envelope had been slipped under his door. No return address, just his name typed on the front. With the caution born from his experiences, he examined it carefully before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Not all of us have been caught. Watch your back, Rodriguez." Mike stared at the message, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline. Rex sensed his tension, moving closer with a soft whine. "It's okay, boy," Mike said, though he didn't entirely believe it. The threat wasn't entirely unexpected. Despite the extensive arrests, Mike had always suspected some of Harrington's associates had managed to avoid detection. The trafficking operation had been too sophisticated, too well connected to have been run solely by those already imprisoned. He photographed the note before carefully placing it in an evidence bag. This would need to be reported, though he harbored no illusions about how seriously it would be taken. Anonymous threats were common against high-profile figures in law enforcement, particularly those involved in corruption cases. Without specific details, there was little that could be done beyond standard precautions. Still, the timing was troubling. Tomorrow marked the start of his testimony in the federal case against Judge Martin Blackwell, who had allegedly helped Harrington by influencing court decisions and warrant approvals. The judge had connections that extended far beyond Lakeside, reaching into state politics and possibly even federal agencies. If anyone had both motive and means to threaten Mike, Blackwell certainly qualified. Mike checked his apartment security system, a comprehensive setup installed after his release. Satisfied that everything was in order, he showered and changed for dinner, tucking his service weapon into its holster, out of habit. Some precautions had become second nature since his ordeal. "Keep an eye on things, Rex," he said as he prepared to leave. The German Shepherd settled by the window, his favorite observation post with a clear view of the street below. The restaurant was one of the new upscale establishments that had opened during the waterfront renovation. Ironically, a project that had been accelerated after Harrington's warehouses were seized and demolished. Mike spotted his friends at a corner table. Kevin Barnes, the veterinarian whose care for Rex had been the first link in the chain that saved Mike's life. Rebecca Chen, whose investigative journalism had blown the case wide open once they had gathered enough evidence. And Andy Thompson, his former partner, now heading a specialized integrity unit within the restructured Lakeside PD. "There he is," Kevin said, standing to greet him. "The man of the hour." Mike shook his head, sliding into the empty chair. "Hardly. The Blackwell case is important, but I'm just one witness among dozens. A witness who was nearly executed because of Blackwell's corrupt rulings," Rebecca pointed out. "Your testimony carries weight that others don't." "Which is exactly why I'm concerned about this," Mike said, showing them the photograph of the Threat note. The table fell silent as they examined it. Andy's expression hardened. When did this arrive? Today, slipped under my door, sometime this afternoon. Building security is checking camera footage, but I'm not optimistic. Kevin frowned. Should you still testify? Maybe request a delay until this can be investigated. That's exactly what they want, Mike replied. Every delay works in Blackwell's favor. Evidence gets misplaced, witnesses get cold feet, memories become less clear. At least let me assign protection, Andy said. Officers I personally vetted. Mike hesitated. His trust in the department, even under its new leadership, remained fragile. I appreciate it, but I'll handle my own security. You know my feelings about this. Andy looked like she wanted to argue, but instead nodded reluctantly. At least promise you'll check in regularly and keep Rex close. Always, Mike assured her. Now what's this big news you mentioned? The tension broke as Rebecca smiled broadly. The Tribune is nominating our coverage of the Harrington case for a Pulitzer. And she paused dramatically. I've been offered a position with the Washington Post's investigative team. Congratulations flowed freely, along with a bottle of champagne ordered by Kevin to celebrate. As they toasted Rebecca's success, Mike felt a complex mix of emotions. He was genuinely happy for his friend, whose career had soared following the case. But part of him also envied her ability to move forward, to translate her experience into something positive. His own path felt less clear, still shadowed by what had happened. And I have some news too, Kevin added, after they had properly celebrated Rebecca's achievements. The university veterinary program has approved funding for my proposal, a specialized training program for evidence detection dogs inspired by Rex. We'll be working with rescue dogs, giving them a second chance while creating a new resource. For rural departments that can't afford traditional canine units. That's fantastic, Mike said sincerely. Rex would be honored to be the inspiration. Andy cleared her throat. Since we're all sharing news, I might as well add mine to the mix. I've been asked to testify before the state legislature next month about police oversight reforms. They're calling it the Rodriguez-Palmer Accountability Act. Mike nearly choked on his drink. They named it after me and Palmer, without asking? It's meant as a recognition of what happened, Andy explained. Your case has become a powerful symbol for the need for reforms. Independent oversight, stricter evidence handling protocols, limitations on prosecutorial immunity. All good changes, Mike acknowledged. But being a symbol isn't exactly comfortable. No one expects it to be, Rebecca said gently. But sometimes our hardest experiences serve purposes beyond ourselves. Your story has already changed protocols in 3 states. That matters, Mike. He nodded, unable to argue with the logic, even as he struggled with the personal implications. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics as the meal progressed, but Mike remained distracted. The threat note, combined with the reminder of his unwanted symbolic status, had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. By the time they finished dinner, the unease had crystallized into a familiar sensation, the investigator's intuition that had served him well throughout his career. Something about the timing felt orchestrated. The threat arriving the day before testimony, the day his friends all shared their moving forward news. It was almost as if someone wanted to remind him that while others could leave the case behind, he never would. Outside the restaurant, they said their goodbyes with promises to meet again soon. Mike declined offers of a ride, preferring to walk the 10 blocks back to his apartment. The night air would help clear his head, and the walk would give him time to process the evening's revelations. 3 blocks from home, he became aware of a vehicle moving slowly behind him. A black SUV with tinted windows, maintaining a constant distance. Mike casually changed his pace, then his direction, turning down a side street. The SUV followed. Definitely surveillance, not coincidence. Mike reached for his phone to call Andy, then reconsidered. This could be legitimate protection she had, arranged despite his objections, or it could be connected to the threat. Either way, he needed more information before reacting. He turned down another street, this one busier with late-night establishments keeping the sidewalks populated. The SUV maintained its distance but didn't withdraw. Mike entered a 24-hour diner, positioning himself at a window seat with a clear view of the street. The SUV parked across the intersection, engine running. Mike ordered coffee he didn't want, using the time to think through his options. Direct confrontation was risky without knowing who was in the vehicle. Calling for backup meant involving the department, which could alert whoever was watching him if they had inside connections. Going home risked leading them directly to his residence, though they likely already knew where he lived. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Blackwell. Not all evidence made it into the case file. Corner of Butler and 7:30 minutes. Come alone or don't come." Mike stared at the message, weighing the obvious risks against the potential value of new information. Butler and 7th was in the warehouse district, largely deserted at this hour. A perfect location for an ambush. But if legitimate, this could be a whistleblower with critical evidence about Blackwell. He made his decision, sending a quick message to all three of his friends with his location, the meeting details, and a simple instruction. If you don't hear from me by midnight, call Carlos Ramirez at the state attorney's office. He then paid for his untouched coffee and left the diner, deliberately heading in the opposite direction from the meeting point. The SUV pulled away from its position, following at a distance. Mike led it on a winding path through the downtown area, through a hotel lobby and out a side entrance, down an alley between restaurants, and finally into a crowded nightclub. He slipped through the packed dance floor and exited through the kitchen, losing his tail in the process. Now moving freely, Mike made his way toward Butler and 7th, approaching cautiously from an adjacent street. The warehouse district was even more desolate than he had anticipated, with most buildings awaiting redevelopment following the seizure of Harrington's properties. Streetlights were sparse, creating pools of yellow illumination surrounded by deep shadows. The meeting point was a small courtyard between abandoned buildings. Mike positioned himself with his back to a wall, scanning the area for signs of movement. His hand rested on his service weapon, ready to draw at the first sign of threat. At exactly the arranged time, a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby alleyway. As they stepped into the dim light, Mike recognized Lisa Morales, a clerk, from Judge Blackwell's office who had been briefly mentioned in the case files but never interviewed. "Detective Rodriguez," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming." "You have information about Blackwell?" Mike said, maintaining his cautious position. She nodded, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Evidence that wasn't included in the investigation. Blackwell kept separate records of his arrangements with Harrington. Insurance, he called it." "And you have access to these records?" "I made copies," she confirmed. "When I realized what was happening after your case blew everything open, I started gathering proof. I knew eventually someone would come looking, and I didn't want to be caught on the wrong side." "Why come to me now, the night before my testimony?" Lisa's expression tightened. "Because they're cleaning house, Detective. 2 people from Blackwell's inner circle have died in accidents this week. I'm next if they realize what I have." Mike's instincts warned him to proceed carefully. These deaths, were they reported as suspicious? Of course not. Peter had a heart attack at 43 with no prior health issues. Maria's brake lines failed on her way home. The investigations were cursory at best. "And you believe Blackwell ordered this?" Lisa shook her head. "Not Blackwell himself. He's careful, insulated. This is someone else. Someone cleaning up Blackwell's loose ends before the federal case progresses." "The same someone who sent me a threat today," Mike concluded. Likely, which is why I needed to get this to you now. She reached slowly into her jacket, withdrawing a thumb drive. Everything's here, meeting logs, payment records, case assignments. It proves Blackwell was directing certain cases to specific judges to ensure the outcomes Harrington needed. Mike took the drive, weighing it in his palm. If genuine, this could solidify the case against Blackwell and potentially identify other corrupted officials. But something still felt wrong about the situation. How did you know where to find me? How did you get my private number? Lisa's eyes darted away briefly. I still have access to the court systems. Your contact information is in the witness files for tomorrow's testimony. A plausible explanation, but it didn't account for the timing or her knowledge of the threat. Before Mike could press further, a sharp crack echoed through the courtyard, the unmistakable sound of a rifle shot. Lisa jerked backward, a spray of red misting the air as she collapsed to the ground. Mike dropped instantly, drawing his weapon as he scanned for the shooter. The shot had come from above, one of the surrounding rooftops. He crawled to Lisa, staying as low as possible. She was still breathing, the bullet having struck her shoulder rather than center mass. "Stay with me," he urged, applying pressure. To the wound with one hand, while maintaining his vigilant scan for further threats. "They found me," she gasped, her face contorted with pain and fear. "You need to go. The drive is what matters." "I'm not leaving you," Mike insisted, already dialing 911 with his free hand. "Help is coming." Another shot cracked through the night, striking the pavement inches from Mike's position. The shooter was adjusting their aim. Mike dragged Lisa behind a concrete planter, providing minimal but crucial cover. "This is Detective Michael Rodriguez," he told the 911 operator. "Shots fired at Butler and 7th. Officer needs assistance. Civilian down with gunshot wound." Even as he provided the details, Mike knew the response would take precious minutes, time Lisa might not have. The bleeding was substantial, her complexion already paling as shock set in. "Did you see who did this?" Mike asked, trying to keep her conscious and talking. "Not this," she mumbled, "but I know who ordered it. It's in the files, under Project Cerberus." The name triggered a memory from the Harrington investigation, a code name that had appeared in some of the seized documents but had never been fully explained. Before Mike could ask more, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Almost simultaneously, the screech of tires signaled a vehicle departing rapidly from nearby. Within minutes, the courtyard was flooded with emergency responders, patrol officers securing the perimeter, paramedics working frantically to stabilize Lisa. Mike provided a brief statement, careful to mention the thumb drive and its potential significance without revealing specific details that might leak back to whoever had ordered the attack. And he arrived as Lisa was being loaded into an ambulance, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "This is exactly why I wanted to assign protection," she said, pulling Mike aside. "What were you thinking? Meeting an unknown contact? Alone?" "She had information about Blackwell," Mike explained. "Critical evidence that wasn't in the case files. Evidence worth dying for, worth her getting shot." Mike had no good answer for that. He watched as the ambulance pulled away, lights flashing but sirens silent, not a good sign for Lisa's condition. "The shooter was positioned on the northwest corner rooftop," he said instead, pointing to the building in question. "Probably a professional based on the shot placement and immediate extraction." Andy nodded to the SWAT commander, who directed his team toward the indicated building. "We'll check for casings, positioning evidence, any description of the vehicle you heard leaving." "Just the sound, high-performance engine, aggressive acceleration, nothing visual from my position." A forensics tech approached, holding an evidence bag. "Detective Thompson, we found this on the roof. Shooter left it deliberately." Inside the clear plastic was a playing card, the Queen of Hearts with a bullet hole precisely through the center. Andy's expression hardened. That's a calling card. Professional hit. Someone sending a message. Mike felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. We need to get that thumb drive to Carlos immediately. And Lisa needs protection at the hospital. Whoever did this will try to finish the job. Already on it, Andy assured him. I've dispatched officers I personally trust to the hospital. But Mike, you're in danger too. This wasn't random. The timing, the location, the calling card, this was orchestrated by someone with resources and planning. Someone connected to whatever Project Cerberus is, Mike added. Lisa mentioned it before the ambulance arrived. Said it would explain who ordered the hit. The name registered with Andy. He could see it in the subtle shift of her expression. That was in some of Harrington's files, a designation for some kind of special operation, never fully explained. We need to find out what it means, Mike said, and fast. I'm scheduled to testify in less than 12 hours. Andy made a decision. You're coming to my place tonight. It's a secure building with controlled access, and I have a guest room. We can review the thumb drive contents there. Under normal circumstances, Mike might have argued maintained his independence, but the night's events had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. The casual precision of the shooting, the deliberate calling card, the connection to a mysterious project that had somehow remained hidden despite months of investigation, all pointed to a threat more sophisticated than he had initially believed. Let me go home first, he said. I need to get Rex and some files. Andy nodded. I'll have a patrol car follow us. No arguments, she added when he started to protest. This isn't about your comfort level with the department anymore. This is about keeping you alive to testify. The drive to Mike's apartment was tense and silent. As they approached his building, Mike felt an inexplicable sense of dread that intensified with each block. Something's wrong, he said as they turned onto his street. Andy slowed the car, scanning the area with practiced eyes. Nothing seemed immediately out of place. No suspicious vehicles, no obvious surveillance. Yet the feeling persisted as they parked and approached the building. The lobby was quiet, the night doorman reading behind his desk. He nodded recognition to Mike, nothing in his manner suggesting anything unusual had occurred. They took the elevator to the 7th floor, the patrol officers following at a discreet distance. The hallway to Mike's apartment was empty and well lit, showing no signs of disturbance. Yet as they approached his door, Mike noticed something that sent his pulse racing. A barely perceptible scratch on the keycard reader, fresh enough that the exposed metal hadn't yet oxidized. Someone's been here, he whispered to Andy, who immediately signaled the patrol officers forward. Following entry protocols, they positioned themselves on either side of the door. Mike used his key carefully, listening for any sound from within. The apartment beyond seemed silent. "Rex?" Mike called out, knowing the German Shepherd would normally respond immediately to his voice. Nothing. With a nod to the officers, Mike pushed the door open, weapon drawn. The apartment appeared undisturbed at first glance. Furniture in place, no obvious signs of a search. But the continuing silence where Rex should have been growling or barking set off alarm bells. "Rex!" Mike called again, moving cautiously through the living room toward the kitchen. Again, no response. "Check the bedroom," Andy directed one of the officers, while the other moved toward the bathroom. She stayed with Mike as he approached the kitchen, both moving with the careful precision of experienced officers entering an unknown situation. The kitchen appeared normal until Mike noticed the slight discoloration on the tiled floor, droplets of something dark that led toward the balcony door, which stood slightly ajar. His heart pounding, Mike followed the trail, pushing the door open fully. Rex lay on the balcony floor, unmoving. Blood matted the fur around a wound on his side. Mike dropped to his knees beside the German Shepherd, hands trembling as he felt for signs of life. "He's breathing," Mike said, relief washing through him as he detected the shallow rise and fall of the dog's chest. But he's lost a lot of blood. "I'll call Kevin," Andy said, already pulling out her phone. Mike carefully examined Rex, finding a single stab wound in his side, precise and deliberate, designed to incapacitate without immediately killing. The professional nature of the attack was chilling. This wasn't a random break-in, it was a calculated message. As he gently lifted Rex, preparing to transport him to Kevin's clinic, Mike noticed something tucked beneath the dog's collar. A playing card, identical to the one left at the shooting scene. Another Queen of Hearts with a bullet hole through the center. "They were here," Mike said, holding up the card for Andy to see. "The same people who shot Lisa." Andy's expression darkened. "But they didn't take the thumb drive, didn't wait for you to return. This was about sending a message, making it personal." "It already was personal," Mike replied, cradling Rex carefully as they moved toward the door. "But now they've made it unforgivable." Kevin met them at his clinic, face grim, as he immediately took Rex into the treatment area. "Stab wound, significant blood loss, possible internal damage," he assessed rapidly, his professional demeanor taking over despite his obvious concern for an animal he had cared for since puppyhood. "Will he—" Mike couldn't finish the question. "He's strong and healthy," Kevin said, not making promises he couldn't keep. "And the wound appears precisely placed to avoid critical organs. This wasn't meant to kill him, just to hurt me," Mike said, the realization burning through him, "to show they can get to anyone I care about." Andy pulled him aside while Kevin began treatment. "We need to check the thumb drive, see what was worth shooting Lisa for. Then we need to get you somewhere secure until the testimony. Whoever is behind this has resources well beyond what we anticipated," Mike pointed out. "They breached a secure building without alerting security, knew exactly where to find Rex, and coordinated with the attempt on Lisa. These aren't street criminals. They're trained professionals. All the more reason to understand what we're dealing with." Andy's expression was resolute. "Carlos is meeting us at a secure location in 30 minutes. We'll analyze the drive there." Mike hesitated, looking back toward the treatment room where Kevin worked to save Rex. "I should stay with him." "There's nothing you can do here except become a predictable target," Andy said gently. "The best thing you can do for Rex is identify who did this and make sure they're stopped before they can hurt anyone else." Mike knew she was right, but leaving Rex felt like an abandonment. Kevin seemed to sense his conflict, pausing in his work long enough to meet Mike's eyes through the glass partition. "I'll call you the moment there's any change," the veterinarian promised. "He's stable for now. Go do what needs to be done." The secure location turned out to be a suite at the Federal Building, where Carlos Ramirez waited with a computer system isolated from external networks. His expression was grave as Mike and Andy were escorted in by federal agents. "I heard about what happened," Carlos said. "How's Rex?" "Fighting," Mike answered, not trusting himself to say more. He handed over the thumb drive. "This came from Lisa Morales, a clerk in Blackwell's office. She said it contains evidence of the judge's arrangement with Harrington and something called Project Cerberus." Carlos's hands stilled momentarily before he inserted the drive. "That name has come up in our federal investigation too. Oblique references, nothing substantial enough to pursue." "Lisa believed it would identify who ordered the hit on her," Mike said, watching as Carlos initiated security protocols to scan the drive before accessing its contents. The scan completed, showing the drive clean of malware. Carlos opened the file structure, revealing dozens of carefully organized folders. The first contained exactly what Lisa had promised: documentation of Blackwell's coordination with Harrington, including case assignments, rulings, and payment records. "This is explosive," Andy murmured, scanning the files. "It establishes a direct conspiracy between Blackwell and Harrington, spanning at least 7 years." But where's the Cerberus material? Mike wondered, noting that none of the folder names referenced the project. Carlos navigated deeper into the file structure, opening a seemingly innocuous folder labeled Administrative Records. Within it was a password-protected file named simply C Protocol. "This has to be it," Carlos said, attempting several standard password-cracking approaches without success. "Whatever this contains, it's secured beyond standard protection." Mike thought back to his brief conversation with Lisa. "Try cleaning house," he suggested. "It's what she said they were doing, eliminating loose ends." Carlos entered the phrase, and to their surprise, the file unlocked. Inside was a single document, a project outline for something called Operation Cerberus. The contents confirmed their worst fears. Cerberus wasn't just a subset of Harrington's corruption, it was an entirely different level of criminal enterprise. The document detailed a specialized unit operating within multiple law enforcement agencies, providing protection and elimination services for high-level criminal organizations. Blackwell and Harrington had been merely mid-level facilitators for something far more extensive. "This isn't just about drug trafficking or local corruption," Andy said. Her voice hushed as they scrolled through the document. "This is a national-level criminal conspiracy with operatives in federal agencies, including the U.S. Marshals Service," Mike noted, pointing to a section of the document. "The people responsible for witness protection and courthouse security." The implications were staggering. If Cerberus had operatives within the Marshal Service, the entire federal case against Blackwell could be compromised. Witnesses could be eliminated, evidence tampered with, and security protocols breached, all from within the system designed to prevent exactly these scenarios. "We need to alert the Attorney General immediately," Carlos said, already reaching for a secure phone. "Tomorrow's testimony needs to be completely redesigned with different security." As Carlos made the call, Mike continued examining the document, finding a section that made his blood run cold, a list of priority eliminations for the coming week. His name was at the top, followed by Lisa Morales and 3 other witnesses, scheduled for the Blackwell hearing. 2 names had already been crossed out, the same colleagues Lisa had mentioned having accidents earlier in the week. "They have a hit list," Mike said, pointing to the screen, "and they're working through it methodically." Andy studied the list, her expression grim. "Based on this schedule, they plan to eliminate you tonight after making an example of Lisa. When that failed, they went after Rex instead, a warning that nowhere and no one is safe." "The question is, who's coordinating these hits?" Mike said. "The document mentions a primary asset codenamed Warden, but there's no identification." Carlos rejoined them, looking troubled. "The Attorney General is implementing emergency protocols. The hearing is being moved to a secure federal facility with vetted security personnel only. All listed witnesses are being placed in protective custody, effective immediately." "What about Lisa?" Mike asked. "Federal agents are already at the hospital, replacing local police security," Carlos assured him. "She's being transferred to a military medical facility once she's stable enough to move." Mike nodded, relieved that immediate measures were being taken, but still troubled by the scope of what they had uncovered. This warden, whoever they are, they have access to secure buildings, confidential schedules, and professional assets for elimination operations. We're not dealing with a criminal. We're dealing with someone who appears completely legitimate from the outside. "Someone high-ranking within law enforcement," Andy suggested. "Someone above suspicion." The realization hit Mike suddenly, a connection that should have been obvious from the beginning. Or someone whose recent promotion placed them above scrutiny, because they were seen as part of the solution rather than the problem. Carlos and Andy looked at him expectantly. "Commissioner Lawrence Foster," Mike said, appointed to reform the department after Harrington's arrest. His predecessor retired unexpectedly following the scandal. Foster was Harrington's supervisor. For years, Andy acknowledged, but he was cleared during the initial investigation. There was nothing linking him to the corruption. Because he was careful, Mike said, because he operated through Harrington, keeping himself insulated. When Harrington was exposed, Foster positioned himself as the reformer, the one who would clean up the department. It's circumstantial, Carlos pointed out. We'd need evidence. Mike turned back to the computer, searching through the files, until he found personnel records from the Cerberus operation. There was no direct mention of Foster, but there was a recurring authorization code on operation approvals, LF7734. Lawrence Foster, badge number 7734, Mike said, recognizing the format immediately. He's been authorizing Cerberus operations while publicly leading the reform efforts. Carlos nodded, convinced. I'll add this to the report for the Attorney General. Foster will be placed under surveillance immediately, though we'll need stronger evidence before making a move against a sitting police commissioner. Check his movements against the timing of the attacks tonight, Mike suggested, and look into his financial records for connections to the offshore accounts Harrington used. As Carlos made the necessary calls, Andy pulled Mike aside. You should get some rest. Tomorrow's testimony will be grueling, and you've been through hell tonight. I need to check on Rex first, Mike insisted. Kevin called while you were reviewing the files, Andy said gently. Rex is out of surgery, stable but critical. He'll be monitored throughout the night. Mike felt some of the tension leave his body at the news. He saved my life, you know. If I'd gone home alone tonight, I would have walked into whatever they had planned for me. He's a hero, Andy agreed. Now let's make sure his efforts weren't in vain. The secure federal facility where Mike spent the night resembled a luxury bunker more than traditional protective housing. Sleep came fitfully, despite the comfortable accommodations, his mind cycling through the events of the day and the revelations from the thumb drive. Morning arrived with a sense of grim determination. Mike stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, studying the face that looked back at him. 10 months ago, he had been a respected detective. 6 months ago, he had been a condemned man. Today, he would testify against a federal judge and potentially implicate the police commissioner of Lakeside City in a conspiracy that stretched beyond anything he had imagined possible. A knock at the door announced the arrival of his security detail, 4 federal agents who would escort him to the hearing. None were U.S. Marshals, a precaution based on the Cerberus documents that had revealed potential compromise within that agency. These men were from a specialized FBI unit, carefully vetted and pulled from outside the region to ensure no local connections. Detective Rodriguez, the lead agent, greeted him. We're ready when you are. The journey to the secure facility took place in a convoy of identical black SUVs, a deliberate attempt to confuse any potential attackers about which vehicle contained the key witness. Mike sat silently in the center vehicle, reviewing his testimony notes while monitoring their route through the city. Years of police work had ingrained situational awareness that was impossible to suppress. They arrived at an unmarked federal building on the outskirts of the city, entering through an underground garage with multiple security checkpoints. The precautions were extensive, but necessary, given what they now knew about Operation Cerberus and its reach. In a preparation room adjacent to the hearing chamber, Mike found Carlos Ramirez waiting with additional security personnel. The federal prosecutor looked tired but focused, his tablet displaying real-time updates from various investigations spawned by the previous night's revelations. Foster is under surveillance, Carlos confirmed quietly. No direct evidence yet linking him to the attacks, but his financial records show some interesting discrepancies. We're building the case methodically. Any word on Rex? Mike asked, his personal concern momentarily overtaking the larger investigation. Carlos nodded. Kevin called an hour ago. Rex is showing improvement. Responsive, stable vital signs. Still critical, but the prognosis is cautiously optimistic. Relief washed through Mike, providing a much-needed boost to his resolve. Whatever happened today, Rex was fighting. He owed his partner nothing less than the same determination. The hearing chamber was smaller than a traditional courtroom, more reminiscent of a corporate boardroom. 3 federal judges sat at the head of a polished wooden table, with prosecutors and defense attorneys arranged on either side. Judge Blackwell sat across from Mike's assigned position, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes burned with barely contained fury. Mike was sworn in, the familiar oath taking on new weight under these extraordinary circumstances. He began his testimony methodically, detailing his initial interactions with Councilman Palmer, the information they had exchanged about potential corruption within the department, and the evidence that had subsequently been used to frame him. For Palmer's murder, for nearly 2 hours, Mike presented evidence connecting Blackwell to Harrington's corruption network. The judges listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that suggested they were taking the allegations seriously. Blackwell's attorney attempted to discredit Mike's testimony, but the evidence was too comprehensive, too well documented to be easily dismissed. As the session neared its conclusion, the lead judge asked a pivotal question. Detective Rodriguez? These documents suggest involvement beyond Judge Blackwell and Captain Harrington. Do you have information about other high-ranking officials who might be implicated? Mike glanced at Carlos, who gave a slight nod. This was the opening they had hoped for, the opportunity to introduce Foster into the official record. Based on authorization codes found in the operational documents, there is strong evidence suggesting Police Commissioner Lawrence Foster has been directing Cerberus activities from a position above Harrington in the organizational hierarchy. Blackwell's calm facade finally cracked. This is absurd. Foster has nothing to do with... He stopped abruptly, realizing his outburst implied knowledge he shouldn't possess. Nothing to do with what, Judge Blackwell? The lead judge asked. Pointedly, the hearing concluded shortly after, with Blackwell being taken into custody based on the new evidence presented. Outside the chamber, Carlos looked cautiously optimistic. The judges were convinced, he said quietly to Mike. They've authorized immediate expansion of the investigation to include Foster. The question is whether we can secure enough evidence. Before he realizes he's been implicated, Mike's phone vibrated with an incoming call. Kevin's number. He excused himself to answer, heart racing. Mike, it's good news, Kevin said immediately. Rex is awake, his vitals are strong, and he's responding well to treatment. He's going to make it. The relief was so intense, it was almost painful. Can I see him? He's still at the clinic under guard. Once your testimony is complete, they'll bring you here. Mike thanked Kevin and rejoined Carlos, sharing the positive update about Rex. That's one piece of good news at least, Carlos said. Now we need to deal with Foster before he can eliminate more evidence or witnesses. They moved through the secure facility toward the exit where transport awaited. Mike's security detail reformed around him, their vigilance appropriate. Given the morning's revelations, as they approached the garage level, a security alert blared through the building's communication system. Perimeter breach, west entrance. All personnel implement lockdown protocols immediately. The federal agents moved with practiced efficiency, redirecting Mike away from the planned exit route toward a secure room deeper within the facility. Carlos followed, already on his phone coordinating with other federal authorities. Multiple armed suspects have breached the outer security perimeter, he reported, covering the phone briefly. They're using law enforcement credentials, Cerberus operators posing as legitimate responders to the alarm they triggered. Foster's making his move, Mike concluded. He knows he's been exposed. The secure room resembled a small command center with multiple monitors showing security camera feeds from throughout the facility. They watched as a tactical team moved through the building with military precision, neutralizing security personnel with non-lethal but incapacitating methods. "These aren't ordinary criminals," observed one of the federal agents. "They're using federal tactical protocols." "Because they are federal tactical personnel," Mike said grimly. "Just corrupted ones." On one monitor, they saw Judge Blackwell being escorted by what appeared to be U.S. Marshals, but given the context, likely Cerberus operatives extracting their compromised asset. "We need to assume they've prioritized two objectives," Carlos said. "Extracting Blackwell and eliminating key witnesses, meaning you, Mike. They'll have cut external communications and will control all exit points." Mike studied the security feeds, his detective's mind analyzing options. The building plans we reviewed during security preparations showed maintenance tunnels connecting to the adjacent federal buildings. They might not have those covered if they're focusing on the main access points. "Worth a try," Carlos agreed. "But we'll need a distraction to get there safely." One of the federal agents stepped forward. "My team can provide that. We'll make it appear we're moving Detective Rodriguez toward the north emergency exit while you actually head for the tunnels." The plan worked perfectly. While the agents created a diversion, Mike and Carlos navigated the maintenance tunnels, eventually emerging in an adjacent federal building where they established secure communication with FBI headquarters. Within minutes, a comprehensive federal response was being mobilized, with assets from multiple agencies deployed to contain Foster's operation. Mike's immediate concern was Rex, vulnerable at Kevin's clinic. If Foster knew they had escaped, he might target others connected to the case. A secure escort was arranged to transport Mike to the veterinary clinic, while Carlos remained to coordinate the federal response. As they approached the clinic, Mike noticed police cruisers already stationed outside, potentially legitimate protection for Rex, or possibly Cerberus assets maintaining surveillance. He recognized Officer Eric Malloy, who had publicly supported him during his trial. "Detective Rodriguez," Malloy called as Mike approached. "Detective Thompson established a protection detail here after reports of the incident at the federal building. She personally vetted every officer assigned." Inside, Kevin led Mike to Rex's treatment area. The German Shepherd was awake, his eyes immediately brightening at the sight of his partner. Despite his injured state, Rex's tail thumped weakly against the treatment table. "Hey, buddy," Mike said softly, carefully stroking the dog's head. "You did good. Saved my life." Rex whined softly, clearly wanting to do more than his injured body would allow. The loyalty in those intelligent eyes made Mike's throat tighten with emotion. Their reunion was interrupted by Andy's arrival through the clinic's rear entrance. "Foster's mobilized half the department," she reported. "He's using the federal building incident to justify a citywide manhunt, citing armed and dangerous. Suspects connected to domestic terrorism. Most officers have no idea what's really happening." "Cerberus is more extensive than we realized," Mike said, briefing her on the morning's events. "Foster had assets positioned throughout the federal facility. We barely got out." As they implemented additional security measures, Mike's phone rang. Commissioner Foster himself, his tone perfectly calibrated to project professional concern. "Detective Rodriguez, I'm relieved to hear you're safe. We've been attempting to locate you since the incident at the federal building." "Commissioner," Mike responded neutrally, "I understand there's a citywide alert in progress." "A necessary precaution," Foster replied smoothly. "Armed suspects breached federal security, extracted a high-value prisoner, and attempted to eliminate witnesses. The situation represents a clear public safety threat." "Interesting interpretation," Mike said. "My experience was somewhat different." "I understand you've experienced significant trauma recently, Detective. It would be perfectly natural for that to affect your perception of events under stress. I have a medical team standing by to provide evaluation and support." The implied narrative was clear. Foster was establishing groundwork to discredit Mike by suggesting psychological instability resulting from his near-execution experience. "That won't be necessary, Commissioner. My perception is quite clear, particularly regarding Operation Cerberus and your role as its director." When Foster spoke again, the facade of professional concern had hardened. "These conspiracy theories are troubling, Detective. They suggest a deeper psychological impact than initially assessed. For your own welfare, I'm authorizing a psychiatric intervention team to secure your location and provide immediate evaluation." "You mean a Cerberus tactical team to ensure my silence," Mike countered. The pretense dropped completely. "You understand nothing, Rodriguez. Cerberus isn't just an operation, it's a necessary correction to a broken system. Sometimes justice requires operating outside conventional constraints. That's not justice, Foster. That's corruption wearing a badge." "Call it what you want," Foster replied coldly. "But understand this. You're not the first to discover Cerberus, and none of your predecessors lived to testify. Your execution was scheduled once before. Consider this your final reprieve. Stand down, check yourself into psychiatric evaluation, claiming stress-induced paranoia, and you might survive this." "Not going to happen," Mike said firmly. "Federal authorities have all the Cerberus documentation. It's over." Foster's laugh held no humor. "Federal authorities can be managed, Detective. Evidence disappears, witnesses have accidents, investigations get redirected. You've accomplished nothing except ensuring your elimination will now carry official sanction." The call ended, leaving Mike with absolute certainty about Foster's intentions. He shared the conversation with Andy and the FBI team leader, who immediately escalated their security posture. The clinic's security cameras showed increased police presence gathering outside, more units than the basic protection detail would require. "He's establishing a perimeter," Mike concluded. "Standard containment protocol, first step before a tactical breach." "We need to buy time," Andy said. "Once this becomes a public standoff with federal authorities engaged, Foster loses his advantage." Kevin relocated Rex to the clinic's basement isolation ward, their most defensible position, while Mike, Andy, and their security teams established defensive positions throughout the building. Outside, Foster himself had arrived, establishing a command post from which he directed the expanding police presence. He projected calm authority, the consummate professional managing a high-risk situation, the perfect cover for his actual objective. "We need to change the narrative," Mike decided. The FBI team established a video link with Rebecca Chen, who was already covering the developing situation for the Tribune. The connection went live to multiple networks simultaneously. Mike spoke clearly and directly. "My name is Detective Michael Rodriguez. Earlier today, I testified in federal proceedings against Judge Martin Blackwell regarding his involvement in a criminal conspiracy called Operation Cerberus. During that testimony, evidence emerged implicating Police Commissioner Lawrence Foster as the operations director. Foster responded by attacking the federal hearing, attempting to extract Blackwell and eliminate witnesses. As he spoke, the security monitors showed Foster becoming aware of the broadcast, his carefully maintained professional demeanor slipping as he realized the narrative was escaping his control. "The officers surrounding this building are not all willing participants in Foster's operation," Mike emphasized. "Many believe they're responding to a legitimate threat because that's what they've been told. Commissioner Foster is exploiting their trust to eliminate witnesses before federal authorities can act on the evidence we've provided." The effect was immediate and visible. Officers in the containment perimeter could be seen checking phones and tablets, undoubtedly viewing the live broadcast. Some turned to look toward Foster's command post with visible confusion. Others stepped back from their positions, clearly uncertain about their role. Foster's response came through the clinic's phone system, his voice taut with barely controlled fury. "This ends now, Rodriguez. You're broadcasting dangerous misinformation that threatens public safety and officer morale. Stand down immediately." "The only danger here is your attempt to silence witnesses," Mike responded. "Stand down your officers, Commissioner. Federal authorities have all the Cerberus documentation. It's over." "Nothing's over until I say it is," Foster replied, abandoning pretense entirely. "You think federal agencies can't be managed? Evidence disappears. Witnesses have accidents. Investigations get redirected. You've accomplished nothing except ensuring your elimination will carry official sanction." The damning admission broadcast lived to a national audience, hung in the air as Foster apparently realized his critical error. Outside, multiple officers were now openly backing away from their positions, some returning to their vehicles, others were engaged in heated discussions, with supervisors clearly questioning their orders. Despite losing control of the situation, Foster wasn't finished. He gathered his core Cerberus operatives, those too invested in his operation to abandon it, and prepared for a final desperate assault before federal intervention could arrive. "They're going to make one push," Mike warned, watching their tactical positioning. "All or nothing attempt to reach us before federal assets can establish control." The Cerberus assault came with the precision of highly trained operators. Simultaneous breaches at 3 entry points. Flashbang grenades preceding entry, designed to disorient defenders long enough for the tactical teams to secure their objectives. Mike and Andy had anticipated this approach, positioning their defenders to maintain coverage despite the disorienting effects. The resulting exchange was chaotic but disciplined, with both sides showing the restraint and precision of professional law enforcement. "They're pushing toward the basement," Andy reported. 3 operators moving along the east corridor. Mike adjusted his position to intercept, encountering the Cerberus team as they approached the stairwell leading to Rex's secure location. The lead operator hesitated momentarily upon recognizing Mike, a fatal error in the tactical situation. Mike used the brief advantage to disarm the man with a precision strike, sending his weapon clattering across the floor. The other operators responded with immediate aggression, but the confined space limited their tactical options. Mike engaged the closest threat directly, using his extensive close-quarters combat training to neutralize the operator before he could bring his weapon to bear. The third operator managed to fire a single shot that grazed Mike's arm before Andy arrived from a connecting hallway, her perfectly timed intervention forcing the man to surrender rather than face overwhelming odds. Throughout the clinic, similar scenarios played out as Foster's Cerberus operators found themselves facing defenders who had anticipated their tactics. The assault faltered, with operators either neutralized or forced to retreat. Outside, the arrival of federal tactical teams changed the dynamic completely. The FBI Quick Response Team established an immediate perimeter, their distinctive vehicles and clear federal markings creating an unmistakable federal presence. Regular police units readily yielded to federal authority, Foster himself seeing his final gambit failing and federal assets taking control, made a desperate attempt to escape in his departmental SUV. He might have succeeded if not for several patrol officers who, having heard his damning admission on the live broadcast, used their cruisers to block his exit route. The commissioner's last stand occurred in the parking lot outside his command post. Surrounded by federal agents and increasingly isolated, Foster finally surrendered, though not before attempting to delete evidence from his tactical command systems. Inside the clinic, Mike made his way to Rex. He found the German Shepherd still secure in the basement isolation area, Kevin having protected him throughout the assault. Despite his injured state, Rex showed immediate recognition when Mike entered, his tail wagging with unmistakable joy. "Hey, partner," Mike said softly, kneeling beside the dog's bed. "It's over now. We did it." 6 months later, on a bright morning at Lakeside Park, Mike and Rex walked side by side along the waterfront path. Rex moved with his characteristic alertness, though a slight hitch in his gait remained as a permanent reminder of that night in Mike's apartment. Otherwise, the German Shepherd had made a complete recovery, his resilience matching that of his human partner. The Cerberus case had resulted in unprecedented changes throughout law enforcement in Lakeside City. 37 officers across multiple agencies had been indicted, with Foster and Blackwell receiving life sentences for their roles in Palmer's murder and the subsequent conspiracy. The reforms implemented in the wake of the scandal had become a national model for police accountability and oversight. Mike had declined reinstatement to the police department, instead accepting a position with the Justice Department's newly formed Public Integrity Unit. His experience made him uniquely qualified to investigate corruption within law enforcement, a mission he approached with the same dedication that had once made him an exceptional detective. Rex continued as his partner, now officially certified as the department's first forensic evidence detection dog. Together, they had already uncovered 2 additional corruption networks in neighboring jurisdictions, their remarkable partnership becoming something of a legend among law enforcement professionals. As they reached their favorite spot overlooking the harbor, Mike paused, watching Rex explore the shoreline with enthusiastic curiosity. The German Shepherd had never lost his passion for investigation, his innate ability to find what others missed. "Good boy, Rex," Mike said quietly. "The very best." Rex looked up at the sound of his name, intelligent eyes meeting Mike's with the pure, uncomplicated loyalty that had saved his life when all other hope was lost. Mike knelt, scratching behind the dog's ears exactly the way he liked. Some debts could never be fully repaid, Mike reflected, but honoring them through how you lived your life, that was something he could do every day. For Rex, for Palmer, and for the justice system he still believed in, despite having experienced its worst failures. Rex nudged his hand impatiently, ready to continue their patrol. Mike smiled and stood, following his partner's lead as they moved forward together into the morning light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.